This is the Inside Track. We discuss health, healthcare, and medical insurance simplified.
Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Inside Track. We've got very exciting news for you today. We've previously covered items like diabetes and the effect that can have on not only you as a patient, but us as a gap cover provider, us as a service provider. Today, we're going to look at something similar. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Avron, and we're going to discuss nutrition.
Yeah, hi guys, and great to be doing this podcast. I mean, this is a fascinating topic, and we know certainly over the last couple of years, nutrition is becoming more and more important. Well, it's always been important, but we're understanding the importance of it.
Sure.
And what was very interesting is that recently, you know, the traditional food pyramids we all grew up with, and how they stack the foods. Well, that's been turned on its head to an extent by the nutrition societies, and I thought it would be a really good idea to speak to a dietitian to understand what's happening, why it's been shifted upside down, and where is the emphasis now in terms of nutrition, and that would impact a lot of the shows that we've done before, in the chronic diseases, etc. So we got hold of a very well-known dietitian in South Africa, Shani Cohen, who does a lot of consulting individuals and corporate, and we got this interview.
Great. Let's listen to what she said.
Shani, so happy to have you on our podcast. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Great. It is a really interesting topic, and I think it's very educational, important that people know about it. So maybe we can just kick off, and maybe I can just ask you at a high level, what are the new USDA dietary guidelines designed to achieve, and what are the most important updates in this version?
So I think it's important to start off with just mentioning that the USDA does release new guidelines every 5 years, and they guide everything from school lunches to public health campaigns. So at a high level, these new guidelines are still about the same goal as they always have been, and that's to reduce chronic diseases like heart disease, diabetes, and obesity, but by purely focusing on improving how people eat. What's different in these guidelines is how the message is presented, more so than what it was before. So instead of the plate model that we've seen for the past decade, the guidelines bring back a flipped food pyramid. Protein foods, dairies, healthy fats sit at the top alongside fruits and vegetables, while whole grains are now on a different level and they are at the bottom in a much smaller section. The focus is more on nutrient-dense foods and adequate protein at each meal, rather than building the diet mainly around grains like the old pyramid suggested. These guidelines are just really strongly promoting real food.
Sure.
They want fewer ultra-processed foods, less refined carbs and added sugars, more vegetables, more fruits, more meat, more dairy, more legumes, nuts, and healthy fats. It's interesting that the protein recommendations have increased. Variety is encouraged, so they include meat, eggs, seafood, plant proteins like beans and lentils. So while the fundamentals haven't changed, you know, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, limiting sodium, sugar, saturated fats, while that hasn't changed, the emphasis now is a lot more on whole foods, protein, and less processed foods.
Right, and we are going to unpack all of that, but just for our listeners and viewers of this podcast, let's just go back a step here in terms of, because we all grew up with a certain food pyramid we have in our mind. What did the old food pyramid look like? And sort of, well, let's start there in terms of the one we grew up with.
The one we grew up with is completely the opposite of one that we are now being told to do. So at the bottom, the base of the pyramid, the biggest bulk of the pyramid promoted whole grain foods. Things like oats, whole wheat bread, whole wheat pastas, bran products. And that was kind of the idea that at every single meal, we should include some sort of whole grain. Now, it's not necessary that these guidelines now are saying that we should cut these foods out completely, but what they are saying at the moment is just to limit them a little bit more. Where the focus on the old pyramid was less on protein, now with the new pyramid, there's a lot more focus on protein, and they're actually recommending at every single meal include some sort of protein source.
Okay, so we had grains, carbs at the base of the pyramid, which was the widest part of the pyramid. What was next on the pyramid?
Next on the pyramid was your fruits and your veggies,
Mm-hmm.
followed by your proteins and then your fats.
Okay, fine. So now, according to the USDA dietary guidelines, and I presume the US, that comes out of that must be the US Dietary Association. Am I correct? That we're getting these guidelines from. You say they've turned the pyramid upside down in terms of what are they putting at the base of the pyramid?
So at the base of the pyramid now is more your proteins.
Okay, so proteins form the base, and the next level up would be the
Next level up would be your saturated fats,
right.
or any fats. And then right at the top of the pyramid now is your whole grains.
Okay, so it's
So
a
the tip
total
of the
reversal.
pyramid.
Yeah, of what we used to, and forming the basis of what we eat is actually proteins and not carbs. Is that right? I mean, just at a very high level.
At a very high level, yes. It is a little bit confusing because it is now kind of sending out mixed messages. But yeah, at a high level, that's what they're recommending.
It's now translated for our listeners and our viewers on this podcast let's translate it into a plate. So when the guidelines now talk about a healthy dietary pattern, what does that actually look like on a plate in everyday life?
Well, actually, it's not about the plate. A healthy dietary
Okay.
pattern isn't about a perfect meal or cutting out specific foods entirely. It's more about how you eat over time. So in everyday life, it looks something like this. So, a lot of vegetables, whether they are roasted, steamed in salads or in a stir fry, a good protein source, something like eggs, chicken, fish, yogurt, beans, lentils. For those that want to focus a little bit more on plant-based things, tofu, some good high quality carbohydrates, ideally something that's a whole grain, like a brown rice, oats or whole grain bread, or a starchy vegetable like sweet potato is a really great one to go for. And then a small amount of healthy fat, some sort of plant-based fat generally, like an olive oil, an avocado, nuts or seeds. So example, to put this in a meal, something like a piece of grilled fish with some roasted vegetables and brown rice. Or for those that are vegetarian or vegan, a lentil stew with some vegetables, maybe a slice of whole grain bread. I think the key here is more variety and balance over the week, but not necessarily perfection at every meal. So the pattern is quite flexible and it works across different diets, it works across different cultures, it works across different budgets, whether
Right.
someone eats meat, vegetarian, or use something in between.
I think that puts it a bit in perspective. I mean, when I was growing up, it was that protein isn't necessarily that healthy to have so much protein. Has that changed? So now, in terms of how we're understanding that, in terms of what needs to be in our daily diet.
In terms of the general healthy individual, the guidelines are actually recommending a little bit more protein than what we are used to. And in terms of the individual that may have a disease condition, something like liver disease or kidney disease, the medical nutrition therapy guidelines used to be quite restrictive in terms of the protein that one could prescribe a patient. But now we're actually seeing that protein is quite beneficial for muscle mass. And whether you are a healthy individual or whether you are an individual with some sort of chronic disease, muscle mass is crucial. And I think that's why there's a bit more of a focus on the protein at the moment.
I was sort of going to ask you what's driving these changes. Obviously, there must be new research and information coming into the field. Obviously, building muscle mass, which I've had on some of my other podcasts we've been talking about, is really important. And maybe would that be one of the drivers in terms of increasing the amount of protein that you eat?
Absolutely, because the individual that has a lot of lean active tissue, which is muscle, actually has a faster metabolism. And we all pray to the diet gods for a fast metabolism. So the faster your metabolism is, the easier it is for you to maintain a healthy weight, and the easier it is for you to lose weight if you need to. And we know that weight loss is such an important factor, or healthy weight management is such an important factor in managing and preventing chronic diseases like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes.
Just staying on the subject of protein, people often ask, is it plant-based or meat proteins or a combination? Where has it moved in terms of which type of proteins we're looking at, and what would you recommend?
So I think variety is key. Animal proteins like eggs, chicken, fish, lean beef, and plant proteins like beans, lentils, nuts, seeds, soy are all encouraged. There's no strict rule to eat more or less meat. I think the focus is a bit more on mixing it up and prioritizing quality. So a balanced protein week could include something like Greek yogurt and nuts for breakfast, chickpeas for lunch, or chicken and salmon for dinner. Snacks like hummus with veggies or almonds. Some days lean plant-based, others include lean meats or seafoods. I think the big takeaway with these guidelines is that you need to include protein at every meal. You need to mix up those protein sources, and you need to choose whole protein foods over highly processed options.
Moving on to sugar, right? The recommendation I see is to keep added sugar below 10% of your daily calories. So in practical terms, how do people apply this? And where are most people exceeding this?
So that's exactly it. The guidelines recommend keeping that added sugar under 10% of your total daily calories. For someone eating a 2,000 calorie a day diet, that's about 50 grams or 12 teaspoons. Kids would need to eat even less than that. I think the tricky part is that most sugars just aren't in desserts like we think they are. They're actually hidden in a lot of foods. So things like sweeter drinks, like cold drinks, juices, flavored milks, flavored yogurts, and breakfast cereals is a big one. A lot of our sauces, dressing, condiments, snack bars, biscuits, baked goods, that's where all the sugar is hiding. A large sugary coffee or a glass of juice can use up a big chunk of that limit that they're recommending. So my practical tip is to treat every sugary food and every sugary drink as an occasional thing, not an everyday thing, and swap where you can. Swap out those cold drinks for water, sparkling water, unsweetened tea, and to start checking labels to see if there are any hidden sugars in the food products you may be eating.
So you have to be very intentional about it, right? It's not just, as you say, it's not in the obvious sugars where you would think sugars are, but you actually have to be very intentional and look to keep that to keep it below 10%.
Very intentional, very mindful.
Yeah. Fats, saturated versus healthy fats. Are the guidelines still recommending limited saturated fats? And how should people, because I know there has been change in views on this, view foods like butter, milk, coconut oil, red meat in terms of fats?
So yeah, saturated fats are still recommended under 10% of your daily calories. I think the guidelines are taking a bit more of a balanced approach now, not necessarily an avoidance approach. What they're saying is that butter and coconut oil is fine for flavor, but use it sparingly. Milk and full-fat dairy products can fit into a healthy diet, but you do have to watch your portions or choose lower fat options. In terms of red meat, they do say that occasional lean cuts are fine, but try and mix it up with fish, poultry, plant proteins. In my opinion, most of your fat should come from healthy sources like olive oil, avocado, nuts, and seeds. I would try and take an approach where you think of saturated fats more as an enhancer and not necessarily a mainstay. I do think it's also important to note that these guidelines are a public health campaign. Individuals' needs vary. They vary based on medical conditions, medications, and personal goals. So I do think, if someone is confused by this or wants a bit more advice, check in with your dietitian for a bit more tailored advice on this one.
Sure. So I'm going out after the podcast. Hopefully, I'm going to go order a cappuccino, right, or a latte. Should I be ordering a skinny or low fat, or I can just go for normal? What would you advise me to do?
So assuming that you are the healthy individual,
Yes.
general individual in the public, my recommendation would be to look at the bigger picture, look at what you've eaten the rest of the day. If you had a piece of toast with some butter on in the morning, perhaps go for the lower fat option. But if the rest of your day has been quite a low fat kind of day where you've made low fat choices, then yeah, a full cream cappuccino that froths a little bit nicer than the low fat one can be an option. I do think also be mindful of the portions. So if you are going and ordering a cappuccino, order the short one, don't order the tall one.
Sure.
Make wise decisions about it.
Going on to carbohydrates, right? How should we think about carbohydrates in terms of low carb trends? We know there are a lot of low carb trends, right? And why is there still a strong emphasis on whole grains and fiber?
It's always such a hot topic, carbs.
Mm.
So yeah, low carb diets are trendy, but not all carbs are equal. And I think that's very, very important to note.
Right.
Whole grains, fruits, veggies, they provide fiber, vitamins, minerals, and they give us steady energy that we need. All cars need petrol to go. Carbs are our petrol. Whole grains like oats, brown rice, quinoa, whole wheat bread, they all help to keep you feeling full. They help to support gut health, which is also a very hot topic at the moment. And most importantly, they help to reduce the risk of heart disease and diabetes, which are some of the main killers in South Africa at the moment. Most people don't get enough fiber, so emphasizing quality, high fiber carbs is very, very important. Swapping out your refined grains and sugary snacks for those whole grains, for more fruits, for more veggies, to get energy without blood sugar spikes and to support long-term health is so, so important. The dietary fiber guidelines are, depending on the individual, to try and get about 25 to 35 grams of fiber a day. The average South African is probably maybe not even getting half. So it is important to consider these on our plates.
Shani, what are the most important takeaways for guidelines out of these new guidelines for children and adults over the age of 40 and 50 years old?
So for kids, I think the focus is on building healthy habits early. Fruits, vegetables, whole grains, protein at every meal, limiting added sugars and moderating their sodium or their salt intake is important. These are the habits that we need to build from a young age so that they set in stone, and that's how a child grows up into their adult years. It's important because these nutrient-rich foods support their growth and it supports their brain development, and it sets them up for a healthy body later on in life, where they minimize their risks of developing chronic conditions. For adults over the ages of 40 to 50, I think the focus shifts a little bit more to maintaining muscle, maintaining bone, maintaining heart health. Protein at every meal, like we discussed a little bit earlier, that helps to preserve muscle. Fiber, whole grains, fruits, vegetables, that supports digestion, heart health, weight management. And it's also important, sodium and added sugars, to moderate those becomes more important with age. I think across all the ages, though, regardless of whether the younger years or the older years, the core message is that quality foods, variety, and consistent healthy habits with protein and nutrients is important for everyone.
I think that leads into what was going to be my next question, is that there's so much information, right? We know that comes out of now, people on social media, AI, all over the place. And we see all trends and fads, etc. Nutrition advice can become very confusing for the average person out there and often seems contradictory. How should people therefore interpret all the information with these new guidelines? In other words, should they discard everything and just take these new guidelines as obviously gospel in terms of what they should do? How do people deal with all this information?
It's very tricky. Everyone out there thinks they're a nutrition expert, and
Yes.
whether you're reading the newspaper, magazine, listening to the radio, or listening to a podcast, everyone has a different opinion on nutrition. One day carbs are bad, the next day they're essential. I think the key is to focus on the big picture and not every headline. These guidelines emphasize practical long-term habits. Fruits and vegetables, protein at each meal, whole grains, limiting added sugars, limiting processed foods, and excessive salt. Science evolves, but these principles kind of remain solid no matter what happens. what I always say to my patients is whatever kind of diet or eating pattern that you plan on embarking on, ask yourself if you can see yourself doing it in 6 months' time. If you can, it's a healthy eating pattern. It's a healthy eating way of life. If you can't see yourself doing it in 6 months, it's a diet and it's a fad, and that you shouldn't be doing because it's not sustainable. I guess another question you could ask yourself is, am I eating mostly whole, nutrient-rich foods in a balanced way? If the answer is yes, you're on the right track. And for any personalized advice, if you do have any certain medical conditions or different health goals out there, ask for personalized advice. A dietitian is the person that is trained in nutrition that can help.
So I think that's a message out there for our listeners and viewers. Yeah, for personalized advice and what you should be doing, you should be seeing a dietitian, someone qualified in this field, and don't take the information what you see in the internet as how you should adjust things. And I think sustainability, as you said, is actually key. So I think excellent advice there. So it's really been informative, Shani, and I think there's a lot that we can unpack, and hopefully we'll bring you on to further podcasts. But just to leave our listeners off that, if someone's a shocking eater, right, and they can make changes, what are the three? And this is a message maybe we can leave our viewers and listeners with. What are the three highest impact changes that they could make very quickly that would actually impact their health from a dietary perspective?
So I think if you want to align your eating habits with these guidelines, focus on these three things. Number one, protein at every meal. Eggs, chicken, fish, beans, lentils, or nuts, they can help keep you feeling full, satisfied with your meals, and support muscle mass. I think the second thing is to focus on whole, minimally processed foods, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, instead of the refined foods or the packaged foods. And I think the third thing is to be careful of products that may have any added sugar and salt in them. Small swaps like herbs and spices instead of salt, or fruit instead of sugary treats, makes a big difference over time. These changes are easy to start immediately and can make quite a big impact without you being overly restrictive.
Brilliant. Shani Cohen, expert dietitian and well-known in the field. Thanks so much for your time on our Inside Track podcast today. And hopefully we'll bring you back when we try and tackle other specific areas. But thanks so much for your time and enlightening us.
Excellent.
Greatly appreciate
Thanks
it.
so much.
Great. Thank you.
Well, that's fantastic. You know, I can relate to a lot of what she says personally, having had to adjust my nutrition goals through my diabetic diagnosis. And I can see how it all makes sense. And you know, there's such good news that we're getting out there, because the emphasis previously was it just didn't seem to be working, you know. So I'm glad to see that there's this new mainstream shift of ideas, flipping the pyramid, as we said earlier, the name of the podcast today. And yeah, it's fantastic.
And what's interesting is that historically, and we're going back a lot of years, protein needed to be a very small part of your plate and serving, as we also spoke about. But now it's a significant portion of the plate, and protein, the emphasis on protein is playing a very important role in terms of the management of chronic diseases, which Shani outlined, and which is really important for the listeners.
I also like the emphasis on moving away from low carbs. You know, carbs are not the enemy.
Yes.
But there's also been a movement that talks a lot about low carbs, ultra low carbs, which is great for some people, but the mainstream idea is to move towards smart carbs.
Yeah.
Because your body handles different types of carbohydrates differently. So to be applying some of the science around it and going for smart carbs, I think makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. It does make a lot of sense, Warren, because in the old order, carbo loading for athletes was the thing.
Yes.
And we know today that carbs contribute to levels of diabetes across the world.
Yeah.
And smart carbs, as you say, definitely the way to go.
Yeah.
Because it brings about the balance that we need.
Yeah, smart carbs, protein, and good fats, and that's what we spoke about. And it's almost, which we got out of the podcast, is that it's got to be individualized now. There's not like one blanket diet for everybody. And as Shani explained, it's really about being contextualized and personalized for every individual, the diet, what they need.
Correct. But let's look at how does, this topic of nutrition, what does it do for us as TRA, as a gap cover provider, and then for the industry as a whole? So, we've got a couple of questions that we can throw out there. If nutrition is a major driver of chronic illness, are we seeing a shift from the unexpected medical events to predictable lifestyle-driven claims? So, that's something that we can talk about. From our point of view, are we supporting planned procedures linked to lifestyle diseases? Okay. And is the prevention of that, how does that relate to the financial protection discussion? So it's.
I'll let Alan speak to the financial side of that, but just obviously from the broader medical side, I think we've spoken a bit about it in our previous shows as well. There's definitely been a shift we've seen in medical funds, etc., towards preventive health. Yeah. Not as much as I suppose we'd like there to be, but I think schemes and those of funding are starting to see that they need to start focusing on preventative health, because that's causing significant costs down the line.
Correct.
In terms of management.
Yeah.
Look, the rise in the burden of disease in our country, tracking the American society quite a bit, has certainly learned us that a lifestyle, food sciences or food technology, and the practice thereof is fundamental in staying healthy. Okay. Of course, exercise plays a big role from a mental health and a physical health point of view. But there's no doubt in literature today, and Dr. has had this wonderful interview, that the balance that you bring in your food and the way we consume, sometimes we argue against expense versus non-expense, but health down the line is a bigger expense. It's one of the biggest expense you're going to have if disease hits you.
Sure, because this, one of the points here is the cost of pure nutrition, and it hits us more with the out-of-pocket medical expenses.
Correct, 100%.
That's where it's going to hit. There is a big cost to having poor nutrition. We know that.
Certainly.
Metabolic health and claims trends. We have said this before. We've seen metabolic health is being greatly affected, and on a more destructive level.
Sure. Look, in the grouping of metabolic health, you get your diabetes, which we've chatted about. You've got the high cholesterols. You've got obesity.
All of these things can be helped by having good nutrition.
Exactly. And there are treatments down the line, medical treatments, but it starts with good nutrition and exercise we've spoken about in previous shows, etc.
Because that's preventative, isn't it?
Preventative. But so people have to go back to what they're eating, right? And that message has not changed over all the years. You've got to see now. Obviously, there's through Shani, we saw that there is a bit, new evolving information all the time and data that we can modify. But people have to look at what they're eating.
Sure.
And I think medical funds have a responsibility to educate their members also in terms of what that's part of preventative health.
Sure.
Well, if I just may add, we're talking nutrition. There's a very, very important component that we cannot leave out of this discussion is smart farming, and maybe it's a topic for another show. Because smart farming equals healthy citizens.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm a big advocate of smart farming for the very reason is that in the old order, when farming was highly wheat production approaches across the world and driven by commercial entity more than the health of the nation, it does create a bit of a question mark and say, how does the world of agri shift to meet consumer demands? Because there's a new consumer today.
Yes, 100%.
Sure. And I think governments and the public sector need to incentivize those who are farming to make that shift.
Correct. 100%.
If I can just take a step back, one of the things that we see is that there's a bit of information overload in the nutrition phases, in the nutrition space as well, with people being asked to or recommended to check labels and that sort of thing, but also people, through the advance of technology, information is available via the internet, artificial intelligence, all these sort of things. There's so much more information out there. And we also get the sense that maybe there's too much. Sometimes it's information overload. So,
100%.
What would we be telling our viewers? Be a bit circumspect. Don't just believe everything you here,
Exactly.
you know, just because it says low GI, you know, it might not be the right thing for you.
Exactly.
Just because it is a smart carb might not be the right. So take the time to just see what's available.
Investigate, understand the data out there, listen to podcasts like ours and other informational podcasts that
Yeah.
you know you've got experts.
Yeah.
And don't believe everything you see on social media, for sure not.
Yeah.
And don't believe everything you see on shops shelving.
Yes, absolutely. I guess, I mean, just a way to sort of round that one up nicely is that from us as a TRA gap cover provider point of view, we would want to promote good nutrition because we
Sure.
know that, number one, it affects the health of our policyholders, just generally, if they don't have good nutrition. But we know that it also results in there's a financial impact in claims get
Correct.
higher. So from it really is our responsibility, as it were, to be educating our viewers. So, and that's really the message we want to get out to you
Absolutely.
today.
Sure.
And I think we're going to do another viewer survey. So I think that's working quite nicely. So we're going to have you'll see there'll be a link in the bottom of this video on whatever platform you're watching. That link will take you to our member survey. The nice thing is we're going to get some information from you, complete the survey, tell us how you feel about some of the things we've seen today. And if you enter that survey and you complete it, you stand in line to win a 500 DisChem voucher,
Oh, that's lovely.
which is great.
Okay,
You know,
yeah.
it's
Answer a
it's a
few
nice-
questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can perhaps take that DisChem voucher and go and buy yourself some nutritious food.
Yes.
Or whatever,
Exactly.
some supplements or whatever the case may be.
Exactly.
You know, you can use that sort of voucher to assist with your nutrition. So just some of the survey questions we're going to be looking at, things like which change would have the biggest positive impact on your life? And we talk about things like eating different types of food, different better. We ask what impact that would have. We also ask how often you read the nutrition labels on the food you buy.
Now, that's an interesting one. And I often do surveys out there to actually understand. It would be great to hear from our listeners if they actually
do they
read labels.
Yeah. After listening to this episode that you just listened to, are you planning to make any changes to your lifestyle? So that's an interesting one. Based on what you've heard today, do you intend to make any
Yeah, and
changes?
just to say that change management is one of the most difficult tasks to actually complete, right? Both in a business world and also on an individual basis,
Yeah.
right?
We
And
are
it's-
creatures of habits, man.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it'll be interesting to hear from our listeners. At what
Yeah.
point are they make the decision? Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to take this information and change how I eat.
And then I like this one because this one is the one that gets all of us. Which meal do you find the hardest to keep healthy? We've all got that meal.
Yeah, sure.
Everyone's got their own different meal that
Sure,
they
sure.
just cannot let go of.
Sure.
And you're going to ask breakfast, lunch, dinner, or your snacks. What do you find the most difficult to keep healthy? And then another nice one. What do you believe has the biggest impact on long-term health? Nutrition, exercise, sleep, or genetics? I mean,
Yeah,
Sure.
that
That's
raises-
That's a very good
well,
one.
that's a very good question and actually a very difficult one to answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what you'll find in the survey. We're going to throw
5 questions.
5 questions
That's
yes,
it, for 500 Rand.
for 500 Rand. But we're throwing in a bonus question.
Okay.
I'm not going to tell the viewers what it is. You've got to go and look for it yourself.
Okay.
So,
Great.
Yeah, I think another great podcast. I really believe this is one of those nice practical ones.
Yes.
Those of you watching can actually go and do something about your lifestyle,
Your health.
nutrition, your health, based on what you've seen. So
Yeah, and as we always say, is that the point of these podcasts is actually to add value and for our listeners to actually do something different after
Yes,
the podcast.
correct.
So hopefully here you've all heard something new and something that you can implement today. Today's the day for change. You know, they say to make a change, the best time was 20 years ago. The second
Yes,
best time is today.
absolutely. Yeah.
So make the change, make the difference. Diet has a huge impact, and really it will you'll feel the difference.
Sure.
But talk to us. Warren will place the
Yes. Please
the
email us
details,
always, as
yeah.
always.
It'll be there. Yeah.
Yeah, with any topics you want us to cover, any questions,
Yeah.
you're welcome to email us, and the email address will appear now.
Great.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And yeah, let's Gappy do his thing.
Thanks,
Bye for
everybody.
now.
Cheers.
Bye.
Don't stress, the gap is covered.